So today we will be talking about motion-induced blindness. The illusion consists of a center dot that blinks green, and around it there are 3 yellow dots or the targets that remain constant. There are multiple little X's or crosses that rotate in a circular motion around the green dot in the center. What should happen is, while staring at the green dot, the yellow dot should begin to disappear and reappear. Sometimes it'll be 1, 2, or possibly all 3 that disappear. If you look away or blink, you can see that the yellow dots are always present. What researchers find so interesting about this illusion is that no one really knows why it happens. There are multiple theories that have come up over the years that we will briefly be going over. Okay, so boundary adaptation and depth perception is the first theory. This is the idea that the boundaries around the target fade and the mask takes its place, leaving the target invisible. It also has to do with the size of the target. Depth perception is just that the target disappears more when they are presented behind the mask rather than in front of it. This just forms a surface over the target that helps it disappear. The issue with this is that the target will continue to disappear even when presented in front of the mask. What this tells us is that the target size and perceived depth of the target play a role in the disappearance, but are not the ultimate cause of it. The second theory is surface completion or perceptual completion. This is really just a filling in idea. We get signals from the surrounding areas, the contrast, orientation, the junction, binocular disparities, global spatial relationships, which all provide cues that will fill in the space that disappear. The third theory is interhemispherical rivalry. The general idea is that each hemisphere plays a slightly different role for the same task. The left hemisphere is more general, and the right hemisphere plays devil's advocate. The meaning for motion-induced blindness: when the target disappears, it is the left hemisphere gaining control and ignoring or denying the discrepancies or the targets. However, when the right hemisphere gains control, the target pops back into view because it calls attention to the discrepancies. This theory says that the two hemispheres complement each other. The next theory is perceptual scotomas. What this theory suggests is that the targets are perceived to not actually be in the real world, but rather stem from something internal. For example, our optic nerve and blood vessels within our eyes are considered scotomas. Our visual system basically edits them out of our awareness because it serves no purpose and would cause problems, resulting in the physical aspects to go unnoticed. Perceptual scotomas go along with the idea of filling in. This is because otherwise there would be a random part of our visual field missing. Our visual system uses the surrounding areas to complete the picture. Looking at the motion-induced blindness illusion, we are able to see that the illusion does not have a missing spot where the targets are, but looks as though the small X's are completing the rotation. The reasoning behind this theory is because the targets accurately reproduce what a scotoma looks like to our visual system. The idea behind this is, in the real world, outside of this illusion, we don't usually have a stationary object or target that remains put while the rest of our visual field is in motion. This visual system then notices this possible mistake and attempts to fix it. The next theory is attentional influences. This theory allows for a winner-takes-all mode. Winner-takes-all means that one stimulus will gain your attention over another. In this case, the X's gain control and the target loses, therefore they disappear. This goes alongside attentional switching or task switching. This is the unconscious switching of attention from one stimulus to another, meaning competing objects are seen one at a time. Attentional switching is also why the losing stimulus will pop back into view. This also explains why higher contrast of color between the target and the mass will disappear more often. Because the mass and target are competing, we get a larger reaction, therefore a larger need for one of them to win. One idea for why the targets are the ones that always disappear and never the mask is because the distractors are in more than one place. This makes it easier for the targets to be the one to disappear. Attentional mechanisms have been suggested to be one reason why targets disappear. When a suppressive pulse given through TMS with the basic illusion is applied to the parietal regions immediately after disappearance, it increased or decreased depending on the stimulated hemisphere. There is evidence for both low-level processing and high-level processing involved in the target disappearance of the illusion. One hypothesis is perceptual filling in is thought to be caused by a bottom-up sensory adaptation to edge information. This is thought to occur early on in the visual system, stemming from the LGN or even possibly the retinal ganglion cells. Perceptual filling in is actually very complicated. There needs to be a loss of signal, disappearance of the target, and there needs to involve filling in the blank spaces. Some researchers believe that for this reason there is a retinal cortical component that is involved. For example, retinal adaptation could lead to a weakened edge signal sent from the retinal ganglion cells, followed by a cortical filling in process. Other researchers believe that motion-induced blindness involves perceptual rivalry between the mask and the target, which may arise due to attentional mechanisms. They do not believe that retinal suppression, sensory masking, or adaptation has much to do with motion-induced blindness. These are all lower-level processes. Viewpoint is sometimes one dot disappears, other times more than one. Also, they may not always reappear at the same time. If retinal stabilization was the sole cause of motion-induced blindness, fixation would stabilize all the dots equally, which would then make them disappear at the same time. This also brings up microsaccades and blinking. This should, in theory, make all the dots reappear at the same time, but it doesn't always do that. The finding that motion-induced blindness can continue even during movements of perceptually vanished objects also suggests that motion-induced blindness is not caused by bottom-up local sensory adaptation. However, researchers have found that we have an increase of microsaccades that occur before the targets come back into view. This leans towards a bottom-up local sensory adaptation to edge information that is important for perceptual fading to occur. One study used fMRI and saw that neural activation happened at multiple sites of our visual system. Their studies showed that hemodynamic blood oxygen dependent levels, or BOLD signals, correlated with the target when it disappeared. Researchers suggested that disappearance may happen later on in the visual process because there wasn't much of a BOLD response in V1 through V3 when the perceived disappearance happened. Rather, the BOLD activity decreased when the perceived disappearance of the target in the ventral stream area of V4. However, activity in the dorsal stream increased when the target disappeared due to the moving of the mask. In 2013, researchers looked at how the time series of fMRI activity in different retinotopic subregions corresponded to the target and mask in motion-induced blindness. They found that in V1, fluctuations of neural activity show the phase durations, or how long the target disappeared, whereas in V4, the neural activity showed the rate, or how often the target disappeared. It is difficult to say what is involved when it comes to perceptual rivalry and processing. It's suggested that the selective attention and visual awareness go through different processing through our visual system, but the disappearing targets is thought to happen between V2 and V4. Another idea is that there is earlier levels of processing that happen before a top-down selective attention occurs. Motion-induced blindness is sensitive to cues that affect grouping and depth relations. This is thought to mean that motion-induced blindness does not happen at earlier stages of visual processing, but instead might originate in extrastriate or higher areas due to the competition of the target and the distractors. For the first experiment, there were two dots in the upper area of the screen. Before the motion-induced blindness illusion was shown, there was an arrow that showed the participants which dot they should focus on in their periphery. The goal for the participant was to report changes to the color of the target dot. When one of the dots disappeared, they were instructed to press a key. This would lead them to a black screen where they had 3 seconds to say if it was the left, right, or both that disappeared. Then the next trial would start. This would repeat with the same dot being monitored for 8 trials. Then it would switch and you would monitor the other dot for the color change, but both were to be monitored for disappearance. For the second experiment, they viewed the motion-induced blindness display with one yellow dot in the upper left area of the screen. The spot in the middle that they were meant to look at is now shaped like a T. The participants are meant to push and hold a key when the dot is invisible and release when it is visible, but the T in the center was there to distract them. This was to test attentional load. There were 3 conditions: no attentional load, meaning the T didn't change; low attentional load, the T would change color and the participants had to say when it turned red; and finally high attentional load, where the participants had to say when the T was either yellow upright or green inverted. The results for experiment 1. Reaction time did not change much between the two sides. Interestingly, targets that they attended to were more likely to disappear. This was significant among the 6 participants. Also, the right side perceptually disappeared quicker than the left. For experiment 2, they captured 2 variables: perceptual switching, how many times the target disappeared and reappeared, and the average time the target was invisible. Adding attentional load increased the duration the target was invisible, but decreased the perceptual switching. This was especially true for the higher load. Spatial attention to a target will increase the likelihood it will disappear compared to the unattended target. It can modify processing in local regions of our visual field. Spatial attention usually strengthens the contrast of the target and mask through competitive interaction, aka winner takes all. Disappearance occurs more when there is a higher contrast between the target and the mask. This separates the target from the distractors. This suggests that motion-induced blindness is due to higher-level processing. Experiment 2 demonstrated that perceptual switching requires attentional resources. It also showed that by directing our attention away from both the distractors and targets, we slow down the need for competition. This slows down the need for attentional switching. The first experiment goes along with attentional switching. We are unable to divide our attention between two separate elements. Depth perception implies neuronal competition between target and distractors. Again, this is a winner-take-all viewpoint. There are a lot of different ideas about which theory is correct, and a lot more research needs to be done. Although interhemispherical rivalry and perceptual scotomas are interesting, attentional influences and winner-take-all has more research and stronger ideas to back it up.